Hi, I'm Jim Stroud, and this is my podcast. Today, I had a very interesting conversation with Magos. He is the co-founder and CEO of Metaview. We talked a lot about AI. Yes, a lot of people are talking about AI, but it is the topic du jour, especially in recruiting circles. In our podcast, we talked about recruiter AI readiness. We talked about the impact of AI on the human aspects of recruiting. We talked about how AI has a role to play in recruiting long term. And we talked about risk mitigation, ethical considerations, the future of AI in recruiting, so many things. I enjoyed the conversation, and I think you will too. Stay tuned to hear it in its entirety right after this. The Recruiting Life is a newsletter that gives a whimsical view of the world of work. It aspires to educate and entertain with articles, comics, videos, podcasts, contests, and more. It is produced on a weekly basis by yours truly, Jim Stroud, and is supported by readers like you. Topics in this newsletter include the future of work, current labor trends, sourcing passive candidates, and more. Subscribe now and receive it every Monday in your email by going to jimstroud.com/subscribe. That's jimstroud.com/subscribe. Link in the podcast description. Don't wait, subscribe now. Operators are standing by. Hello and welcome to the Jim Stroud podcast. Today we have a very special guest. Tell us, who are you and what do you do?
Hey, Jim. Thanks so much for having me on. My name is Siadhal. I'm one of the co-founders here at Metaview.ai. Metaview is an assistant for your interviews. So Metaview makes it so that you, as a recruiter, do not need to worry about taking interview notes anymore. Get an AI to do that for you, so you can focus on having a much more engaging conversation with the candidate and spend a ton less time on actually writing up your notes afterwards, because we structure it super nicely for you.
Wow, where were you 20 years ago? I could have used it. Could have used it. You mentioned AI. Everyone's talking about AI. It's like the topic du jour, topic of the age, actually. And so many things are discussed when it comes to recruiting with AI, especially around recruiter AI readiness. Let me ask you, are recruiters ready to adapt to this changing role of AI in the recruitment industry? What do you think?
I think in some ways it's sort of irrelevant if they're ready. It's like this revolution is happening, so you sort of have to be ready or get ready. But I would also say that I think adopting AI is it's not like a hard skill to learn. Like when I say hard skill, I mean like it's almost closer to a soft skill is what I mean by that. Like it's a lot about building up your intuition around understanding, well, what parts of my day-to-day am I doing on autopilot? Because if I could do it on autopilot, there's probably someone out there who has built an autopilot or is building an autopilot to do that for me. And it's not really about you having to adapt and change your behaviors so much. It should be about how this AI can wrap around you. I think maybe one of the things that happens is people get exposed to ChatGPT, they start to use it, they realize sometimes it gives great answers, sometimes it gives dud answers, and you only know that because you're an expert. And so you're thinking, well, non-experts out there think that answer's correct. And so this is just sowing all sort of seeds of misinformation out there, when actually the way we're finding, and definitely the way we try to help to apply AI to people's work, is less about sort of chat, getting an answer from an AI. It's more about how can it help you do the thing that you're trying to do. It just sort of massively accelerates your ability to do it. And in that world, you don't have to learn anything. Actually, it's almost like delegating to a new joiner in your team. It's a very different relationship.
That being said, then, do you think that HR professionals are adequately trained to be effective utilizing AI, or does it really matter? Since
I think there's a spectrum. So I think I definitely hear some cases where folks are using AI tools and one of the things that AI tool does is generates an answer. And you do hear some people who take, well, if this generated that answer, that must be a good answer. And that's a bad place to be. That person needs to be trained to realize that's not the case. And I think the key thing that maybe the training that does need to occur, again, is less about hard skill training. It's more about sort of conceptually, if you're using an AI tool, you still have to understand that you are accountable for whatever output. If that is communicating to a candidate and you've used an AI to help you generate that communication, you are still putting your name to that communication. You're accountable for it. Or in our case, if you're making a judgment on a candidate, or if you're writing up a scorecard on a candidate, or if you're providing a summary to a hiring manager about why you think they should speak to that candidate, these are all things that we help our AI helps you with. But you are still accountable for that recommendation, which is essentially a decision that you're making. So I think that the training is much more conceptual. You're still responsible for the outcomes. You're just using these tools to help you get to the outcome more quickly.
I like that. It's sort of like, I think the expression is human in the loop. You got to keep a human in the loop of things. I'm thinking of a couple of news stories I've seen over the past few years where people were so tuned in to their GPS, they literally drove into a pond or to a lake or something because the GPS said turn left, even though common sense would have told them not to do it.
Yeah, and the sad thing is, I had a really similar. I was sent down a very, very narrow road recently. GPS told me to, and my car didn't fit. So I've been one of those people. Anyway.
Do you think AI will redefine the skills and competencies required for recruiters to succeed in the future?
Yeah, and in many ways, I think it will go back to it's a to a degree back to the future. So I'm a big believer in a lot of the sort of the thinking that Richard Cho has been putting in that. Richard Cho, who is the talent leader at Robinhood, Meta, and a bunch of other amazing companies. He's been really beating the drum about this return to relationship-driven recruiting. So I'm a big believer in that. I think that recruiters will essentially, right now, recruiters spend a lot of time on some tasks that is, I would say requires a lot of grind, requires a little grit and determination, which are great attributes, don't get me wrong. But a lot of those tasks where you really need to grind, they're going to go away. And you're going to have this move to some recruiters who move more sort of towards the relationship driven side. I'm going to be the person who knows candidates really well. I become really influential. I really understand their psychology and their motivation, and I match them against hiring managers who I also understand really thoroughly. And you're really going to encompass that human side of recruiting. That's very far away from being disrupted, right? No one's thinking about how AI is going to do that. That's a thing that recruiters are the best people on the planet at doing. And so they'll do a lot more of that, which I think is great. And then I do think there'll also be this other push towards more thought around, recruiting operations, essentially, tools, planning, these sorts of things. So I think you'll get this specialization where maybe I think there'll be, to a degree, this back to the future world where you'll get a large portion of recruiters who will spend more time on the relationship side of things, which I think is a good thing. I think recruiters will want that. And I think people talk a lot about wanting to be able to spend more time advising hiring managers rather than, herding a candidate through an interview process. And I think you'll get a bunch who maybe will have to learn new skills, which is more around, what is our suite of tools now that in this new paradigm where AI should be sort of like touching on many parts of our process. Your tool set's probably going to change. How you plan is probably going to change. And I think in that world, it's a lot of newness.
Yeah, I quite agree. I definitely agree with this could be more relationship driven. Those I think the more successful recruiters will be along that wise. But I also can see how some newer recruiters may do a bit of pushback because they tend to be more machine minded. When I say machine minded, more into social media and that kind of thing. And I've seen some experiments where some recruiters have connected ChatGPT to Zapier, and they're sort of automating everything to the point where all they do is just say hello, and then machine takes over. And I can see the advantages of that, but I also see it as a disadvantage because when you become too reliant on the machines per se, and you can't actually talk to someone. Yeah, I think at the end of the day, recruiting is a people business. You got to be able to talk to people, and I think too much technology could take your proficiency away, if that makes sense.
I'd agree. I think I would look at folks who have done that as like showing a lot of ingenuity, a lot of initiative, and that's like a separate category of good skills, and they probably will be successful just because of the underlying sort of initiative that they showed. But yeah, where I totally agree with you is those tools that they're currently patching together, they will start to exist as tools that everyone can use. And so the delta, their advantage goes away. So where are you going to become advantaged as a recruiter? It's going to be in the human elements. That's where you're going to have alpha. That's where you're going to be able to demonstrate that you're superior to other recruiters, which is, there's a degree of competition in everything we do. It's going to be based on, hey, are you able to sort of convince this person to take this role? Are you able to help the hiring manager understand the realities of the market more quickly so that you actually get the headcount in and you can move on to the next one? Are you going to be able to run a great debrief session where you get to the right answer? It's going to be those are the things that where you're going to earn your money, essentially.
Definitely. And I think you may appreciate this. I saw this discussion. It was on LinkedIn. I won't name the tool. But the tool allows a virtual person to interview somebody. So the person, the candidate would talk to a machine rather, and the machine would just spit out questions and the candidate would respond. And so a lot of the recruiters and some job seekers were just lambasting this. I mean, they were like, "Oh my God, what? No!" and they really gave it a bad welcome. And so I really appreciate your perspective and how your tool brings the human connection back to recruiting, which is where it belongs.
Yeah.
So kudos to you for that.
Appreciate that. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Speaking of like the human aspects of recruiting, do you think AI and recruitment lead to a loss of personal touch? I guess we had already touched that a little bit, but do you think this is AI will increase or decrease the overall personal relationships? I think we've sort of been debating that, but
I guess there'll be net. I think it will massively increase. I think basically you move from a world where you might have had sort of light interactions with lots and lots of people. So so you could look at that in some way as like a more human thing because you've talked to lots of people.
Yep.
To maybe you automate some of the parts of your communications with candidates, but that's all in service of being able to have really in-depth conversations and interactions with fewer candidates. So that's essentially the way that we're seeing, like, customers who use Metaview. That's what they do. They spend less time on sort of a lot of the things around talking with candidates and spend more time actually having great conversations with them. So yeah, that's the way we see it going, for sure.
Cool. Now, I know that whenever there is a discussion about getting some sort of new tech tool, people look at time and cost and that kind of thing. From your perspective, can AI reduce the time and cost involved in the recruitment process without sacrificing quality, which is key to that?
I mean, that is what technology is, in my opinion. So every sort of revolution, every technology revolution we've had essentially comes down to a sort of a point in time where our ability, where we were suddenly able to get more output for less effort. And then we sort of had to work out, how do you redistribute our effort now that we still have some hours in the day? So like, what else can we do to get output? So totally, it is going to lead to those things, an increase in quality more quickly. So yeah, I'm 100% a believer in that. And frankly, the technology will not survive if it does not achieve those things. So if I put it in very basic terms, or no, in basic, if I put it in terms that I'm very intimately familiar with, because it relates to the sort of the industry I work in, which is around interviewing, the fact that now recruiters don't have to think about taking notes during the call is both an improvement in the quality of the interaction. So I'm getting more insights out of the candidate because I'm not trying to do two things at once. While at the same time, I'm saving time because I'm also not having to then go and clean up my chicken scratching notes afterwards to try and package it up so it's actually legible to someone else. So that's like a really obvious example where quality is clearly increasing. We hear it every customer Metaview will tell you that, and we're saving time. So I think obviously you'll get like particular tools who might index more on the quality side or more on the saving time side. I think usually it's more on the saving time side. People tend to sort of focus their innovation there initially because it's so measurable. But yeah, I mean, these technologies will not win. People are not going to buy these tools unless it achieves one or both of those things.
I like what you said there. I like how being able to concentrate on the person you're talking to, you can pick up on those nonverbal cues that you normally would miss because you're taking notes and looking up and looking down, looking up, looking down, that kind of thing. That being said, though, do you think AI could have a role or should have a role in understanding, assessing a candidate's soft skills and maybe emotional intelligence? Or should it always be a human gut connection, you think?
I think having a role is probably like the right way to ask the question. Like, should it have a role? Yeah, maybe it should have a role. Now, should it be the decider? No. So I think that's like there's like a spectrum between how much of a sort of influence does it have, all the way up to like from no influence at all, like you're not allowed to even think about how an AI might help you with a decision, all the way through to the AI is going to make the decision for me. Now, we obviously every company, every individual is going to choose their spot on that spectrum, and probably no one will be at either extreme end. What I would say is right now, the vast majority of innovation, and definitely the vast majority of our innovation, is much more on the enabling people to be more human through AI. I stop doing some of the sort of the quite drudgerous tasks you historically used to do. You can be more human and we save you time. So essentially automation, you can think of that as, and we're spending a lot of time there. But I think the thing that comes quite soon after that is what I generally describe as detection. Now, one of the things that AI is really good at, because it consumes so much data, in parallel, there's no sort of, it's not like it has to schedule itself to join this interview, then join that, and it can join one at a time. It can essentially gather data from every single interview in, your company, even if they're all happening at the same time. One of the advantages of that is it can detect things that otherwise you as an organization would essentially miss or wouldn't have the opportunity to pass on to someone. What I mean by that is, if we can tell you in the future, hey, this candidate that you're about to reject actually answered a bunch of questions in a way that was very similar to someone who you previously extended an offer to and went on to be a top performer. So I'm not telling you you should hire this person. I'm just flagging to you that you might be making a decision that is not respecting some additional insight that I've just passed to you. So it's more like identifying when can I detect things that might influence this person's decision to make it a more accurate decision. Yes, I think AI will play a role there. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. It makes me wonder, are there any parts of the interview process you think AI will replace completely?
So I think the way that we see things going, and indeed the way that we're developing our product, is that increasingly you'll think of these AI tools as an assistant, almost like, and a really helpful mental model for that is to think of it almost as an additional human being on your team that never gets tired, but has a very specific and limited job. So in our case, for example, one of the things our product does is after you run your interview, you come to Metaview, the notes are all there for you. And we also then help you generate your 1-paragraph summary of the candidate. You click a few buttons and it generates this summary for you. Now that we've had that product live for a few months now, you'll see, of course, the recruiters are often coming in and choosing the exact same topics to construct their summary with. And so at some point, our AI is going to say, you know what, you don't even need to tell me. I'm just going to assume these topics are what you want. And I'm going to have that summary of the candidate ready for you 2 minutes after you finish the interview. And then at some point after that, you're going to say, well, every time that Metaview produces a summary for me, I don't even edit it. I'm happy with it every single time. So now I'm going to increasingly reduce the level of oversight I have over an AI, but I choose which tasks that for. So if I decide that I'm really happy with the way I've trained my AI, the personal AI that I'm using, that I know it always does a great job of writing up my summaries, I'm going to stop overseeing it and it's going to completely automate that task for me. Yes, those things will happen. But I think where people will have a lot of agency and people have to make decisions is, what things do you focus on training your AI around? What things do you decide, no, I still want to have oversight over that because I think it's important and I don't think the machines can do as nuanced a job as me yet. That's going to be the decisions that recruiters will be making day to day. And not in like a super explicit way. It's not like I'm deciding, it's just going to be borne out through your behaviors. Like, do you start to realize, well, this is reliably great and I'm not going to worry about it anymore, which is often how we work with other people, right? If I hire a junior member of my team, I have them work on a project initially. First project I'm going to look at, I'm going to be probably going through it with a pretty fine-tooth comb to understand, is it great before I put it in front of, let's say, a customer, and I gradually withdraw. But if that person's a poor performer, I'm probably not going to gradually withdraw. And it's not explicit. I just have a confidence level in that person in this case, or an AI in the AI case, and that determines my behavior.
Totally get it. When you mentioned about the different decisions recruiters will make when using the AI, what comes to mind are ethical considerations. How can recruiters ensure they're using AI ethically and responsibly and mitigating potential biases in the system?
Yeah. So I think the most important point is what we mentioned earlier, which is an understanding that the accountability still remains with the human. Like that's just baked into our laws, right? The person who's going to sort of get in trouble with law enforcement if something is done that is illegal is going to be the human being, not the AI.
Sure.
So that's like a fundamental piece. That's not enough, obviously, because you still I still think there's probably a level of sophistication of understanding. Not only is it your decision, but therefore which parts of your process should you lean on AI for that aren't risky, from like a ethics or a bias perspective, and which parts are. So I think it's really hard to give a hard and fast rule on that. I think we're all like learning this together. Our approach is we focus on things that are, we very deliberately stay away from anything where our product makes a judgment or a recommendation. It's very much based on, in our case, summarizing what actually happened in the conversation. These were the questions. Here's the bullet point summary of how they answered. It's very essentially fact-based. It's not sort of generating an inference or a recommendation. Now, do I think we should never generate inferences or generate recommendations? No, I'm not saying that. I think at some point we're gonna have to work out like how do we leverage this really powerful technology to help us in those areas too, like the decision making. But for now, we're a little bit. I think there's enough benefit to be gained by automating what are clearly quite thoughtless tasks. And yeah, for the next couple of years at least, I think that will be where we spend our time at least.
You say eliminating thoughtless tasks. Do you think AI will eliminate more or create more job opportunities for HR professionals in the recruitment field, especially?
Job opportunities was the question.
Yes.
I think the demand for great recruiters will go up. I'm speaking mainly on the recruiting side, less on the HR side, I guess. But that, again, just because that's where I'm most aware. So I think the demand for great recruiters will go up because I think there's going to be this movement towards what is essentially higher skill work, talking with people, being great at judging, being the people person. Things that almost are a little bit cliche that people say about recruiters. Oh yeah, they're a great people person. Those are actually going to be really, really valuable things that people are going to have high expectations around your ability to do it. So I think the demand will go up. Will one recruiter be able to run more recs than they were previously as a result of that? Potentially. So I think there could be a scenario where a company that has the same headcount hiring goal as they've always had probably should realize some efficiencies in terms of needing fewer people to achieve that. But then you sort of run into this classic sort of paradoxical situation where, well, maybe the fact that we can now hire people who are so much more effective means we should hire more people because they're all representing better value for money. So I think basically every company will be different on that way. Companies that are more, I guess, cash cow businesses that are focused on cutting costs and keeping the money coming in. Yeah, you'll think about how can we reduce headcount, but still have the same outcome. Again, always the way companies have operated. This is not an AI thing. It's just life, or certain life in certain organizations. And then you'll have the high growth companies who are seizing opportunities, and they'll think, wow, we can now actually almost get away, or we can afford to. It's the responsible thing to do to put more energy, more resource, more money into hiring up this team or whatever it might be, because actually every single person is now 50% more productive than they were a week ago. So net, really hard to say, especially when you take the whole of HR into account, because I think then there's really interesting ethics questions that HR functions will be responsible for sort of delivering policy to. So I can imagine some jobs emerging there for sure. But it's really hard to, I guess, get an overall forecast on it.
Yeah. But definitely food for thought for sure. One last question, if I may. Overall, do you think AI is a threat or an opportunity for HR professionals in the recruitment field? Overall, what would you say? What does the gut tell you?
You can totally color me an AI optimist. I think it's a massive opportunity. I think a lot of the things that I've heard recruiters and recruitment leaders talking about for a long time as things they wish they could spend more time on, they are now going to be able to do that. because a lot of the things that they wish they didn't have to spend time on, they'll increasingly not have to. So I think it's a massive opportunity. And if I was going to sort of reduce it down into one sort of point of why, in particular, the AI revolution is an opportunity for recruiting and HR as well, but is because they are the most human-centric roles, right? Much as we were doing lots of work that sort of involved putting information into different sort of software systems and whatnot, still at the center of what you do in recruiting is a human being. And that's not true for a lot of other roles. If your role actually was predominantly inputting information to a system, yeah, that's like going to be quite heavily disrupted. But if your core thing was enabling human beings to make large, nuanced, subjective decisions, actually, this is the sort of the least exposed to the negative implications of AI. I would argue. So I think, yeah, it's a real opportunity to lean into those human elements, definitely strongly held belief on my side.
Very cool. Very cool. You've been very generous with your time. If someone had additional questions to pose to you, or just want to know more about Metaview, how can they find you?
Yeah, well, thanks so much for having me. So best bet, if you want to learn more about Metaview, head over to our website. That's metaview.ai. You can sign up for a free trial of the product, or get in touch with a member of the team if you want to hear more about that. We also operate a great newsletter, which I'd recommend to folks, called the Recruiters AI Digest. So where there's so much news about AI every week. We consolidate what are the main things you really need to know as a recruiter or be aware of as a recruiter each week that really impact recruitment. And then me personally, probably best place to reach out to me is either Twitter or LinkedIn. My name is spelled pretty strangely. It's Siadhal. So there aren't many of me. So give me a search and you'll be able to find me pretty easily.
Thank you so much for being a guest on the Jim Stroud podcast.
Thanks, Jim. Appreciate it.
Well, my time is up. I thank you for yours. I'll see you again real soon right here with a brand new episode of the Jim Stroud podcast. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to reach out to me. I can be reached by email at jimstroud@jimstroud.com. And one last favor, if I may ask, please rate this podcast. 5 stars is preferred, but please comment with your honest opinion. I really appreciate that. All right. Okay, until next time, bye-bye.